I would define race as a social construct that categorizes people's external physical characteristics into different racial groups. Particularly the social construct phrase in this definition is what I would like to bring to light, because noticing and understanding that race is a social construct is very important, because thinking that race is predetermined and biological is overall bad for the people in the world, because it just brings unnecessary assumptions when not knowing a person. I came to this idea through videos on the subject I've seen online and my own personal inferences when people bring up the subject of race. An example of what I see as race could be the difference between what I look like compared to someone that could be considered white. As for me, I have a tan, darker skin tone, dark brown eyes, and a darker hair color. But someone that could be considered white could have lighter skin tones, lighter eye shades, and lighter hair colors. These differences are what determine the categorization of race, and that's my definition of race. And essentially, to sum it all up, race is basically what you see instead of what you know about the person. In terms of ethnicity, it is more of an internal categorization of people, where rather than focusing on physical characteristics to a group of people, it is based on a person's cultural heritage. I have come to this conclusion through my own research that was brought upon when I learned that being Mexican doesn't classify as a race, but rather as a being and ethnicity. Drawing myself as an example of what ethnicity is, we can see that I have a significant other, both of us being of Latino descent. But the key difference between the both of us is that I have a darker skin tone compared to her, and she could be considered white. Though we both have different skin tones and what we look like, it doesn't negate the fact that we're both of Latino descent, both coming from Mexico. And this is what the definition of ethnicity really means. It's the culture and the regional aspect of where you're from. Speaking of culture, in my opinion, I would define culture as the learned values and behaviors shared by a group of people. The key word in this definition being learned, because the key difference between race and ethnicity, both being about what you look like and where you're from, culture is about focusing on the individual and more, hence learned. Because you don't learn something from far, far away unless it was from those that came before you. Unlike race and ethnicity, it's very important in terms of culture, because culture is the closest thing that we have as an identifier to an individual. But an example of culture could be the differences in America and Japan when it comes to how food service workers are treated. In America, it is customary to leave a tip for your server when going out for a meal, especially if they do a good job, just to have a reward and make sure that they're self-sufficient in their day. However, in Japan, it could be considered insulting when giving a tip because of their customary beliefs and how it is a service and they're already meant to do that in their job description. These ideas are what I think to be culture. And with everything in mind, I would like to classify myself as Latino American. The reason I choose these two labels is that in terms of race, I don't feel like I necessarily align with anything in particular in terms of the census, and I felt like that for a long time. But in terms of ethnicity, I feel Latino fits me very well based on my Mexican background. The reason I choose to hyphenate it with American is because of my culture, which basically adopted it, the American culture, due to me living in California for my entire life, along with having my Mexican culture from my Latino descent. I choose to go in depth about these ideas because of how they fit into my everyday life. In terms of culture, I make sure to say please and thank you whenever possible due to politeness being heavily enforced in my culture. And that is only but one of the many, many things that I've learned from culture. In terms of ethnicity, I find myself learning of how similar my friends' cultures and customs are compared to my own, though we may look drastically different. And in terms of race, I find it important to learn and understand the concept due to us facing it every day, just by seeing different people. But the main takeaway with race is that I like to leave with you is that race is basically just surface level. In order to fully understand a person and their backgrounds, it is important to go more in depth and have a conversation with them, rather than just making assumptions purely based on looks.